All right guys, welcome back to the channel. So today's video, we're gonna be tuning on this Oldsmobile Cutlass. This car has been upgraded with a supercharged LS3. I believe it's on an E38, maybe E67 ECU. But either way, let's get it inside and check it out. All right, so let's go ahead on and get the hood up. This thing is done interior wise too. It's a pretty sharp car. Got the Asante wheels. All right, so it looks like we got a 4-inch intake tube, LS3/LS7 style, like card style math. Got the CTS-V throttle body on it. LSA Supercharger. Now I was told this is essentially like a stock bottom end L99 with a Texas Speed Stage 3 camshaft. Intake temp sensors up top. Got the LSA red label 2.5 bar map. Got some long tube headers. Not sure what trans is in this thing. I believe it's actually a 6L80, but I will double check it in the tune. Return style regulator. Does have the reference hooked up, so everything looks good. A decent sized heat exchanger up front. So let's go ahead on and get the tune file pulled out of this thing and see what we've got going on. Now you guys are probably gonna see me fumbling around with the ignition quite a bit. This car has a push button start, and when they work okay, but sometimes they can be a pain in the ass to deal with. So anyways, we're gonna read out the file in this thing, see what we've got going. Car does run and drive. If I remember right, I believe the injectors are an FIC 850. And this car should be on pump gas, but I will verify the injectors before we even make any changes. So we're gonna go ahead on and do the read file on it, and then we will figure out what trans is in this thing and what the current shape of the tune looks like. So right away, I'm seeing it's an E38, and this is gonna be based on the earlier truck ECU, which is just like what we had on the LS9 powered 3rd gen yesterday. Hardware wise, CT42, so I'm gonna assume it's a 4L80. I mean, I guess technically it could be a 4L60 or maybe one like the GM Performance 4L75, something like that. But what I'll do is when I get underneath the car, we'll look at the trans and see what it is, but I'm gonna assume it's a 4L80. So that's good. So LSA cammed 6.2 with a 4L80. Be a pretty stout little combination. Be a fun ride for sure. All right, so the first thing let's do is let's go ahead and check see if it's 4L80. So we're gonna click trans. General, look at the gear ratios, and 248 first gear, that means it's 4L80. So that's cool. I'm gonna check injector data first. So injector data, with this being a vacuum referenced fuel pressure regulator, this should essentially be flatlined, but it is not. Let's see. So the injector flow rate looks low. So maybe they've doubled stoic. They did. So we got double stoic. Let's check IVT terms to see if they have them, and they did not. So a couple steps missed right there. Long-term fuel trims disabled. Power enrichment, they are on the 1-bar operating system. So 1.195, I think that's like 0.83 lambda, maybe. Let's see. Okay, so they're commanding like, I don't know, 83.5 lambda. That seems awfully lean for a supercharged application. So we'll need to address that. Pull timing. Okay, they haven't scaled air mass, but I mean, hopefully the thing's on lowish boost, because that's quite a bit of timing for an LS3 with a blower on it, on pump gas. Okay, so I've kind of seen what I need to see. So let me verify injectors. Again, I believe they're either FIC 850 or an FIC like 660 or something like that. So I'm gonna verify that, and then we'll start working on the tune. I'll back it up on the 4-post and we'll go underneath it. Okay, so we've got an Fuel Injector Clinic 660 injector. So I'm gonna go ahead on and pull up the injector data for it. If you guys are unaware, most of the good injector companies actually have injector data on their websites. So you can actually go on to fuelinjectorclinic.com, and I believe it's under like technical data, and then you'll see ECU data, and then you go down and you'll find whatever injector you've got. So I'm gonna go ahead and look at flow rate versus pressure, and we're gonna scale it more than likely because this should be a 63 pound/hour limitation. Let's go to fuel, general, flow rate versus pressure. Let me make this bigger. Yeah, so this has the 63 pound/hour limitation. So we're gonna scale this. All you gotta do is go to scaling and you type in 50, and then we're gonna look at our axis. This should be the one that does not end in all 8s. Yeah, so it's 128 to 144. So we're gonna find the corresponding data, which is right here. And I'm gonna go ahead on and I'm just gonna highlight the table for right now. Control C. Okay, yeah, that's basically what they had. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to check fuel pressure and determine where we're at fuel pressure wise. I'll probably just set it to 58 with the line disconnected if it's not already. So I'm gonna do that, and then what we'll do is we'll end up flatlining this injector data. This vehicle does not have a fuel pump control module, so it doesn't understand the pressure delta, and we're not going to really have a pressure delta due to the vacuum referenced regulator. So I'm going to check fuel pressure, and then we will set up the injector data data correctly. All right, so let's get this thing started. You guys will see the procedure. You gotta hit like the unlock button, it lights that up, and you push and hold the brake. It just starts up. Well, as you guys saw, we don't have a fuel pressure gauge, so I'm going to, I guess I'm gonna see if I can find a fuel pressure gauge, because we've got to check that first. So in case you guys are wondering, injector data is always what you want to start with. You always want to start with the basics when you're tuning a combination like this. So we need to make sure that map sensor data is correct, intake temp sensor data is correct. So like on these, the intake temp sensor for IAT2, you need to take the data from an IAT2 sensor from like a CTS-V, and you need to input it into IAT1 on one of these, because this car is no longer running the intake temp sensor from the mass airflow sensor. It's actually going to take the intake temp straight from the blower lid. So you always want to check the basics first. So we're going to go ahead on and set fuel pressure. That way we know our injector data is correct, and that way we know we're getting a good tune up in this thing. So I'm going to go ahead on and try to find a fuel pressure gauge, and then we're going to go from there. All right, so we're going to go ahead on and check fuel pressure. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Right now I've got like 58 or so, but that is going to be with the reference line still on. So anytime you're setting up fuel pressure, you got to pull the reference line. All right, so now we're sitting at like 63. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the fuel pressure down with the line disconnected, and I'll hook the line back up, and then we'll be ready to start tuning. All right, so got fuel pressure set down to 58. Vacuum line is still disconnected, so I'm gonna tighten up the jam nut, and we'll be ready to go. All right, so fuel pressure set. The reference line has been reconnected, and I did go ahead on and add a zip tie to that line. That way we don't have to worry about it blowing off. So that's just a little tip for you guys. Anytime you're building anything with boost, especially if you're running regular vacuum hose, please zip tie it, hose clamp it, something on a car like this. So this, obviously it's got the FIC 660 injector, so theoretically it should have enough injector, but you get a vehicle where it's stock ECU like this, if that vacuum reference line, there's vacuum slash boost reference, that line comes off mid pull, car's gonna lean out. Like, you could damage it. So that line is very, very critical to make sure it stays attached. Like anytime you're working with stock ECU, and that's why we try to push everybody onto Holley or Haltech or Fuel Tech or whatever nowadays, is because those ECUs can actually do closed loop compensation to where, say you're mid pull with a boosted car and you lose a fuel pump or you lose a vacuum reference line, the ECU is going to try to compensate with closed loop to try to make sure the air fuel ratio stays on target. This car is not going to do that. Now, if this car had a fuel pump control module and we were dropping fuel pressure, it could help to do the compensation. With the current hardware that this car has, that boost reference line of the regulator is actually very critical. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and set the injector flow rate and the offset and all that stuff for our current fuel pressure. So you'll see we got 41.9 right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to set this down at 128, and I'm going to set this down at 640, and we're just going to interpolate horizontally. And then flow rate versus multi. Okay, that's one, so that's good. Flow rate multi versus IAT. So one thing I want you guys to understand, that you really need to be utilizing this table. So what this table does is, this table, as air intake temp goes up, it actually is going to richen up the car. If you guys have done much data logging on like a Gen 4 ECU, especially with a twin screw blower or turbocharger, you'll notice that when that intake temp comes up, you really need some extra fuel, because basically how GM does it is GM sprays fuel onto a closed intake valve. And so when those intake temps get super hot, it will actually evaporate the fuel before it even gets into the chamber. So by utilizing this table, you can actually help to keep the car safe. This table is not necessarily richening up the desired air fuel ratio, it's just actually making up for the evaporated fuel that goes away once intake temp gets this hot. So good thing that whoever tuned this before had utilized that. So the next one we're going to do is we're going to go down to offset versus pressure versus ignition volts. Let me double check and make sure they had the correct offset in here. So I'm going to go to 400 kPa. Okay. So now we're going to check short pulse adder, and again we are on an E38, so we're going to highlight right here, copy it, short pulse adder, looks correct. Yep, it was. All right, so the person that tuned this before had basically everything set up correctly in the injector data wise, except for the actual flow rate and offset table. Because we have a vacuum slash boost reference regulator, we do need to flatline it in this instance because we do not have a fuel pump control module. So next what we need to do is we need to have the IVT terms, this AFR term over here. Anytime you're doing half injector flow rate, double stoic, this is part of the process, is you need to have this. Next, we need to adjust our stoic. This car is running on a regular E10 pump gas. We need to go ahead on and make this 14.1, and then we need to double it due to our injector size. Next thing I'm gonna do is, this is just me being me. So fuel density on a swap vehicle like this really isn't necessary, but if you guys are working on a vehicle that actually runs mile per gallon display, or this person may decide they want like something like a edge monitor or something like that, where they can actually monitor mile per gallon, the correct fuel density for E10 pump gas, it's 735,822. And then if you want this to be accurate for the injector data being the way it is, we're gonna half this. All right, so that should get us in the ballpark. So I'm gonna leave everything else. No, actually, I need to double check the basics as far as, okay, map sensor data looks good. I'm gonna go ahead on and put a stock CTS-V file in the background. I'll just scroll down and find just a random one. Okay, this looks good. All right, so map sensor, linear, and offset is good. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that again, this is to make sure that the IET2 is set up. So this car is gonna be, like I said earlier, the air intake temp is actually going to be the one being used in the blower. So on a CTS-V, that is IET2 sensor calibration. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna pull up CTS-V and I'm gonna copy the temperature, and we're going to paste it over here into IET1. And then we're gonna do the same thing for the axis. We're gonna copy the resistance up here, and then we're gonna paste this into right here. So we're gonna paste the axis from IET2 on the CTS-V into the axis of IET1. So now our intake temp should be accurate for this vehicle. Next thing what we're gonna do is, we've got cylinder charge temperature, and because the IET is being taken post intercooler, that means we can essentially not have to use a bias anymore. So what we need to do is we need to go under cylinder charge temperature in our bias. We need to make sure this is 0, and the previous tuner did that. We need to make sure the filter is set to 1, and the previous tuner did that. So good job. Whoever tuned this thing, they actually paid attention a little bit. So, all right, everything else we're gonna leave alone though, other than area scaler for this throttle body is wrong. So we're gonna go ahead on and change it also. Percent max brake, we can go ahead on and change that as well. So we want to make sure we have the correct throttle body data for this car. I'm trying to think of anything else I need to adjust. Should be solid. So I'm going to go ahead on and save this, and we're going to load this into the car and start data logging. All right, so got that tune loaded in. Haven't made any changes to MAF, VE, nothing. I did pull up the tune file, and it looked like that they did actually tune the VE table, which is good. Well, I don't know that they tuned it. It at least looks somewhat correct. So, I mean, it looks like they just kind of, yeah, I don't think it's dialed, but it at least looks like a VE table somewhat. That's always good. So looking right here, yeah, I mean, so far so good. Fuel trims look pretty good. This car does have a slight exhaust leak on bank 2 at idle, so I do anticipate on us seeing a little bit of excessive fuel trim on bank 2. That is not a problem at all. Right now the thing actually seems like it's running great. So we may not have to make too many adjustments to this. I mean, obviously I do have a feeling that the thing's gonna be over timed, and I definitely do think it's too lean for having a blower on it. So we're definitely gonna add some fuel to power enrichment, and I'm probably gonna pull timing on it, and just we'll kind of creep up on it. This thing is just a cruiser. This is not like a race car or anything like that. So we're gonna just try to make sure this is safe to where if he wants to go out and have a little bit of fun, do some burnouts, that the car is gonna be happy doing that. I mean, otherwise everything else looks good. So I'm gonna go ahead on and back it up onto the 4-post, and we'll look underneath it. And if everything looks good, then we'll put on the rollers and get the dial on this thing in. All right, so let's go ahead on and go under the Cutlass. Front tires look new. Front suspension is nice. Looks like it's got like some UMI stuff. I'm not sure about how low that pan is. I think that's just like a truck pan. Kind of low. I think this car would benefit from the Holly pan. And I guess it is tall enough that it really doesn't matter. But anyways, it's got a good looking set of headers on there. Got V-bands. Didn't realize it had cutouts, so that's good. I'll need to find the button for that because this exhaust looks a little restrictive. But it is a 4L80. It is missing the plate at the bottom, which I don't like. So if you guys run 4L80s, they have that big aluminum support bracket, and you'd be surprised at how much strength that actually adds. I know that there's guys that run this like this all the time, but I have actually had it like rock bouncers and stuff where they'll actually break the bell housing from not having this plate. So anyways, exhaust looks good. Got some high flow cats on there. Looks like it's got like 3-inch going back to like Corvette style mufflers where the inlet and outlet's on the same side. So that's where they got the side pipes. So that looks good. That drive shaft feels good right there. Yeah, drive shaft feels good. It's actually a pretty clean car underneath. Like floor pans actually look really solid. Got us a 12 bolt back here. Got us the old school like Monroe shocks. Nice. Willwood brakes, pretty cool little car. So let's go ahead on, and I'm gonna put my wideband in here and then drop it down and we'll get on the rollers. All right, got the Cutlass up on the dyno. Gonna go ahead on and start the data logger. Got the car in open loop right now. I feel like I've showed you guys before, but just in case I haven't, you got a fuel oxygen sensors in this O2 readiness test. Yours will be set to -40. You can just set it to something unattainable like 493. Everything's looking good so far. This, you're gonna see this O2 sensor is flatline. That is because I had to use the upstream on this one. Dyno is in vehicle simulation mode. Let's go on and drive this thing. Now, just like I always show you guys, the vehicle is in MAF only mode, and we're gonna be tuning the VE table at the same time. So far, fueling looks pretty good. This is commanded, this is actual. So far, it's not looking bad. So what I'm gonna do is, before I go on and do a pull, I'm going to slow the car back down. We're gonna go ahead on and move power enrichment up. With this thing having an LSA blower on here, we don't necessarily need the 2-bar operating system. We can just get away with the 1-bar. So we'll make power enrichment to where it'll reflect the vehicle having a blower on here, which for this, I don't know how much boost the car's gonna make. So we're gonna start off with like a 1.282 on power enrichment, and I'm going to pull timing out of the car because obviously, again, we don't have any idea how much boost we're gonna make. So I'm gonna stop the log. We're gonna go on and shut the car off, and we will go on and make the adjustments. So power enrichment. So it also has an enrichment timer set right now. So I just noticed that. So they had a 1-second delay on power enrichment. So not only was it lean right here, but it had a 1-second delay. We're gonna put this right back. Now, you guys did see me just add the 5,000 right here. That is because it is factory setting. If this is set to 0, this is irrelevant. So what I'm also gonna do is on the enrichment ramp out, I'm gonna go ahead on and mirror the CTS-V. So we're gonna have it set up like that right here. That's completely fine. So what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna set down here at like 1.149, and then from say 2000 and above, we'll make it 1.282, and then I'll just interpolate. I'm gonna go ahead on and do the same for alcohol, just because one day we may end up putting this thing on a flex fuel, and I'll just go on and have that step taken care of. Spark wise, you guys can see where it's at on the high octane table. Now, they did not lock out the low octane table, so the NOx sensors were active enough to be able to pull this thing down, which is good. If they work like they're supposed to, it's completely fine. So I'm gonna go ahead on and dig through. I'm sure I've got an LSA Supercharged file for an L99, or this could be an LS3, I'm not sure. It's one of the two, but I'm gonna dig through my files and find a good timing table. So I'll show you guys what we're gonna start off with, but I need to dig through files and figure out what I've got. All right, so what I've done is I've rescaled the axis, so we can actually go up to as high as 2.4 grams per second, but you'll notice I did a big jump from 1.8 to 2.4, and I also did a big jump in timing from 1.8 to 2.4. Again, this vehicle is on pump gas, so I would anticipate this car ending up probably right around a 1.4, so we should have a peak of like 14 degrees in it up top, but we'll just kind of see. So you guys can see that's what the axis looks like. This is what the 3D table looks like, and you'll see where the big gap is. So the table is still smooth and the ECU will still interpolate down, but that way we'll have, I guess I need to charge my laptop, but that way we'll have some resolution right here. So I'm gonna go ahead on and load this into the car and get out my laptop charger, and then we'll start doing some rips. All right, so file has been loaded in. This car does have a stock lower balancer on it. The upper pulley isn't really small, so I'm only thinking this thing's probably only gonna make like 6 or 7 pounds. The power enrichment that I picked, the 1.282, probably a little bit excessive, but I want you guys to understand that LSs really don't care as much about air fuel ratio as what you may think. So whether it's 80 lambda, 78 lambda, 74 lambda, the power is pretty much gonna be the same. So we want to run it as rich as possible without losing power, just that way we know that we're not having any lean cylinders. I don't want any visible black smoke, but you know, if this thing wants 11.2 or 11.0 air fuel ratio, I'm okay with that as long as it's not hurting power. I'm gonna go ahead on and get this thing into second gear and lock the converter, and we're gonna go ahead on and do a little tip in. Again, the dyno's on vehicle simulation, so let's do a little bit of a rip. So we're gonna stop the data log. Air fuel ratio actually looked pretty solid. Let me unlock the converter. So air fuel ratio looked pretty solid. We're actually making more boost than I thought. So right away, probably gonna wanna pull some more timing out of the thing. So 160 kPa should be right around 10 pounds. But just to verify, go to unit conversion. So take the 160 and subtract atmosphere from it. Okay, so 8.7 pounds. So not too bad. We're actually probably in the ballpark, honestly. Gotta make a V table adjustment for sure. Gotta pull a little bit of fuel off the thing. And what I'm gonna do is, intake temp's going up pretty rapidly, so I'm going to go ahead and pull some more timing off this thing, and we'll start actual dyno pulls. Tires, obviously it spun a little bit, so tires should be warmed up now. So I'm gonna make these adjustments and then we'll go in and do some dyno pulls. All right, so just so you guys can see what I did, I'm gonna have this car where at 104 degree intake temp, we're pulling 1 degree, and it's gonna ramp up from there. So that's gonna be my way of reducing timing versus making a timing table change. With this car being on pump gas, timing is much more critical versus intake temp. So that way the car can actually run full timing. If it's cold outside and the heat exchanger's good and the air's good, that way the car can actually have a little bit more timing into it. So I feel like 14.5 degrees is not terrible at 8.5 pounds, but we're at 119 degrees. So at 119 degrees, if we were to duplicate that same pull, we would actually be at like 11 degrees. So what we're gonna do is, now that this table is adjusted, then we'll make our other timing adjustments with our actual timing table. But we had no knock. I pulled like 3% fuel off up top, and I'm gonna make a V table change, and then we'll let it rip again. All right guys, tune file has been loaded in. I did make a change to the V table. I'll show you what it looks like. I also made a change to zone RPM boundaries. So I did go ahead and make it to 1750 to 5500, just like what I always show you guys I do. Zone map boundaries 30, and then I did 150, and then interpolated vertically. This is what my V table currently looks like. So pretty decent looking V table right now. This is just obviously me roughing it in though. So I did make that timing adjustment. So what we're gonna do, I don't like oil pressure. You guys notice right there, I mean, that's starting to get kind of low. The dash says 28, this says 23. Okay, so we're gonna keep an eye on oil pressure. So we're gonna go ahead on and do a second gear dyno pull, and we're gonna do 3,000 to 6,600. The thing's probably gonna spin again. These take a little bit longer to get tires warmed up. But anyways, we've got some timing out of it. Fueling has been adjusted. Now I have not touched V table down low, so we're still a little bit off down low, but let's see what it'll do. So it looks like we hit the rev limiter before we got there, or right at about the time that we got there. It also looks like knock come up. Looks like we had a bunch of knock showing just beforehand. And I'm also going to look at the tailpipes, but you'll see V table is closer. So seeing that the car went way lean, we may be out of fuel pump. So obviously car goes to 0.88 lambda, knock sensors come in and rip out timing. We need to, we'll need to check that. That's not good. Hopefully we're not out of fuel pump. That would suck. Let's get out and see what kind of power it made. You guys can see that we are at 14.5 degrees or so. Should have made somewhat decent power. I mean, we're at the second gear though, we got 24s on it. All right, so the thing did not make good power at all. 421 horsepower, 360 foot-pounds of torque. This could be due to the exhaust. It also ripped out a shitload of timing up top, as you guys saw, but I think we got a fuel pressure drop. So went ahead on and stuck the fuel pressure gauge up there, and we'll do a pull, and I'll have somebody watch it, and hopefully it's just something as simple as putting a pump in it. All right, we're gonna go ahead on and open up the cutouts on this thing. Probably gonna cause my wideband to go kind of crazy, but we'll at least get to see how much power it picks up. Just, you know, exhaust open versus closed. Obviously this will probably be the last dyno pull because I'm sure it's fuel pressure drop. All right, let's do a rip. Car leaned out again, obviously. Didn't start to get kind of dangerous till right as soon as I lifted. Let's see what kind of power it made though. I'm gonna assume it picked up quite a bit. Well, cutouts didn't really pick up anything. 428.9, 362.8 pounds of torque. I need to do some research. Maybe they put an LSA and like decompress this engine, but definitely getting a fuel pressure drop. All right, so we're gonna be done for the day on this car. So fuel pressure is dropping, like basically fuel pressure comes up like it's supposed to, and then as soon as it gets up top, it just drops like a rock. So that's when you guys, like that pull, obviously the exhaust was a lot cleaner. I think it's just blowing out the rust from the exhaust. So this car's been started and stopped a shitload, and it actually produced a lot of water. But you guys will see at the very end of that pull, you'll see that puff, that is actual detonation. And that's just where the car goes so lean so fast that by the time I see it and react and lift, the car's already pinged a little bit. So gonna have to upgrade the fuel pump in the thing. And also what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull out a spark plug. Apparently this engine has been built. All right guys, so got a bit of an update. We contacted the customer to try to find out more engine details. And apparently this engine is actually a direct pull out from a 2012 Cadillac CTS-V with an LSA. With that being said, that completely explains the low power. The car is severely under timed. It's probably gonna want another, I don't know, 6 degrees, 7 degrees. So we're gonna play with that, but obviously we have to upgrade the fuel pump as well. But I just wanted to not leave this so open-ended that is the reason why the power is so low. So just for reference, a stock Cadillac CTS-V, like you take a bone stock V2, put it on that dyno in 4th gear as an automatic, they'll do between 430 to maybe at best 440 wheel. The car is actually in the ballpark for where it needs to be. It's just, again, severely under timed. So they're gonna replace the fuel pump with an upgraded unit. And I think they're actually going to upgrade the heat exchanger since we were seeing quite a bit of a rise on intake temps. So that's gonna be the update for right now. The customer's complaint was it being low on power, which obviously we can see it is most definitely low on power, and it's not an exhaust issue. It could be the 4-inch intake tube being a little bit of a restriction. Probably not a whole lot though. Boost wise, it should be good, but they may have decompressed this thing. So if this thing's like 8.5 or 9 to 1 or 9.2 to 1 like an LSA, then it's gonna want a shitload more timing. I can read plugs. We're gonna check the piston and see if it's got a dish in it. We're just gonna go over it. I mean, there's no reason why this thing shouldn't make at least 500 wheel on this dyno at 8 pounds, even on pump gas, even with these 24s. So we're gonna diagnose the issue. So this car, you guys, go ahead on and subscribe if you aren't already. You'll get to see this car and you'll get to see the payoff on the car once we figure out what all this car has wrong with it. But thanks again for the likes, the subscriptions, thanks for the memberships. If you guys want to see how I tune the VE tables in the background, you can go on and click the link in the description. It'll take you to a membership. So for $9.99 a month, you can actually watch all the members only videos and get to see what I do. But otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow.